Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. The first thing on the work session is I have two proclamations. One to Boys and Girls Club Week and the other to Genocide Awareness and Prevention Month. So we'll do the Boys and Girls Club first, and then we'll do the Genocide Awareness and Prevention. Hey guys, how you doing? All right, the proclamation of the Boys and Girls Club Week, April 8th to the 12th, 2019. Whereas, believing that boys who roam the streets should have an alternative, Mary Goodwin, Alice Goodwin, and Elizabeth Hammersley created the first Boys Club, so used to saying Boys Club in 1860 in Hartford, Connecticut. And whereas, with character development as a cornerstone of the experience, the club focused on capturing boys' interest, improving their behavior, and increasing their personal expectations and goals. And whereas, to recognize that girls are part of the cause, the national organization's name was changed to Boys and Girls Clubs of America in 1990. And whereas the Boys and Girls Club of Washington County was started in 1941, and today serves over 500 children in our community daily at 4 locations throughout Hagerstown and Washington County. And whereas the Boys and Girls Club of Washington County mission is to enable young people, especially those who need us most, to reach their full potential as productive, caring, and responsible citizens. And whereas the Boys and Girls Club of Washington County will celebrate National Boys and Girls Club Week, April 8th through the 12th, 2019, along with over 4,000 autonomous clubs, which are affiliates of the national organization. In total, these clubs serve more than 4 million young people nationwide. Now, therefore, I, Robert E. Brucci II, Mayor of the City of Hagerstown, do hereby proclaim April 8th to the 12th, 2019 as Boys and Girls Club Week in Hagerstown, Maryland, and call on all citizens to join with me in recognizing the Boys and Girls Club of Washington County, along with the Boys and Girls Club organization in our country for providing comprehensive, effective services to our youth. Who would like to do something? Okay, guys, come on up here. You want to say something? Thank you. you don't need to do that, but no. So what you guys got?
To the Boys and Girls Club of Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Oh, I used to when I was at the Hagerstown Suns. I used to drop off 100 tickets every year for you guys to enjoy going to baseball games. So I don't know if they still do that or not. And if they don't, let me know. See if I can't put a bug in someone's ear. Speaking of, opening day Thursday night, by the way. Hagerstown Suns right here, first pitch 6:05. So,
No, thank you so much.
okay, all right. Well, here you go. That's for you, Eric. You ready? I know, I gotta get ready, right, guys? Come on in here, guys.
Hey, good smiles and 1, 2, 3. Okay?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Thanks.
All right, our next proclamation is Genocide Awareness and Prevention Month, April 2019. Whereas throughout the United States, organizations, associations, communities, and museums recognize the month of April as Genocide Awareness and Prevention Month. And whereas from 1915 to 1923, during the Armenian Genocide, 1.5 million ethnic Armenian men and women and children, as well as over 1 million Greeks, Assyrians, Pontians, Syriacs, and others were massacred as part of the planned complete eradication of these indigenous communities by the Ottoman Turkish Empire. And whereas the Holocaust was the annihilation of European Jews and others groups by Nazi Germany and its collaborators between 1933 and 1945. During this time, 6 million Jews were murdered. Roma, Gypsies, people with disabilities, and Poles were also targeted for destruction or decimation for racial, ethnic, or national reasons, and millions more, including homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, Soviet prisoners of war, political dissidents, also suffered grievous oppression and death under Nazi tyranny. And whereas other cases of genocide include the killings in Cambodia in 1975, the massacres in Bosnia in 1992, the slaughter in Rwanda in 1994, and now, in the 21st century, the displacements and deaths of Darfur, the targeting of religious minorities by the Islamic State of Iraq, and the Levant ISIL in the Middle East, and a recent attack in Christchurch, New Zealand, and whereas the Convention on the Prevention of and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on December 9, 1948. All participating countries are advised to prevent and punish actions of genocide in war and in peacetime. And whereas by recognizing and remembering the Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, and all cases of past and ongoing genocide, we help protect historic memory, ensure that similar atrocities do not occur again, and remain vigilant against hatred, persecution, and tyranny. Now, therefore, I, Robert E. Brucci, II, Mayor of the City of Hagerstown, Maryland, do hereby proclaim April 2019 as Genocide Awareness and Prevention Month in Hagerstown, Maryland, in memory of the victims of the Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, and all other genocides. We honor all the survivors as well as the rescuers and liberators and urge all citizens to promote human dignity and confront hate whenever and wherever it occurs.
Good afternoon. My name is Frederick Farah, and I am the president of the National Honor Society and treasurer of Rotary Interact at St. Maria Goretti High School. We thank you for helping us bring attention to the problem of identity-based violence and genocide, since it is easy to overlook crises occurring in foreign countries as we go day to day living comfortable lives. Please help us remember and build bridges between groups in our community by joining us next Monday at our Together We Remember event on April 15th from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. in our school cafeteria. Thank you.
Eric, you want to get a picture?
Okay, here we go. Smiles and 1, 2, 3. Okay. There you go.
Thank you.
All right, City Park lighting enhancements, Rodney.
Good afternoon. Last December, we were in here to talk about our program open space request. At that time, we mentioned that we wanted to do some lighting improvements in City Park. We said we'd be back, and that's today, I suppose. We have some initial ideas we want to review with you and see if we want to make changes to our holiday light display or even year-round light display in the park. Mark and I have been talking about that for several years, that we wanted to take our static display of the silhouettes and possibly do something better with that, and we want to get that discussion started with you today. So I'd like to go through these 3 different ideas with you and then open it to questions that you might have. So the first thing is Les Spade, and he's here with us. He lives in Greenberry Hills, and if you're familiar with that part of our community, he's had a display in his yard for some time. It's very popular. It's a dynamic light display that's set to music. He is moving and will not be doing it anymore at that location and has offered to sell his equipment to us at a greatly discounted rate. It's quite an investment he has in his materials there. What the proposal would be in the west side of the lake. We would have 5 Christmas trees out on the lake. They're not really trees, they would be in the shape of a Christmas tree. And they'd be on rafts, and they would use the lake's reflection to shimmer and light that area. We would continue to probably put a fishing Santa display out on the lake, and also our swan silhouette that we have. What we propose is those lights then would be set to music, and it would be a dynamic display. Maybe they would come on, let's say, at 5 o'clock at dark that time of year, be lit till 9, and play 4, 5, 6 different types of songs that they'd be coordinated to. The only way you would hear the music is if you had a radio receiver, like if you were sitting in your car or something like that. So just to see the display, you'd see the lights changing, but you wouldn't hear the music unless you were tuned to that radio station. After that, we could have a time where it just goes to, say, white lights, maybe shimmers and fades for the next couple hours until it goes off later that evening. The city could pick the music. The amount of lights is 107,000 lights on these 5 trees. So they're 30 feet high. They have stars and displays on top. And we put together a budget if we would want to try to make this happen. It includes purchasing the controllers, setting it all up, setting it up the songs to the programming it to the lights. And we have a proposed budget in our upcoming budget that you're reviewing tonight, CIP 47, that would cover the cost to the initial setup this year. In out years, we would just use our operating budget to pay for the setup once everything is basically in place. Another idea would be to take the silhouettes that we have and have a drive-through situation through City Park. The silhouettes could be relocated. We found at least 10 different places where we could put them. On the map that I have on the TV, everything in yellow is the first idea, where the trees are in the corner of the lake. The silhouette locations could be up Key Street, Highland Way, up by the tennis court, the Valley Mansion House, Valley Arts Association at the Mansion House. They could be spread out throughout that road. Like I said, we found, from when we looked at this in 2015, there was like 10 different locations we could put silhouettes. 6 of them have power already. We could add power to the other ones if we get the program open space grant that we've already applied for, and looks like we probably will get. So that would add another feature, which would be kind of a drive-through display like you see in a lot of other communities. I think it would start out rather straightforward, but it could grow over time if it's something that we wanted to do as a community. The third idea comes from the City Park Neighborhoods First Group, and that's the idea of uplights. They are simply LED lights that shine up into the trees. The light color can be changed to wherever you want it, and this could be a year-round display. And it would be cool to have that around the perimeter of the lake to reflect off the lake and to light the many significant trees that are around the lake there. And this would be funded through our program open space request, again, to get the power to all those trees and get the lights purchased.
Maybe we should follow the pond.
Yeah, right. Of course, they said this was a rendering that they gave me before about what would look like to light the trees and this, the effect of lighting those. So that's basically in a nutshell our proposal is these 3 different alternatives. We just wanted to see if you had interest in moving in one direction or another or try to make all of them happen. We are prepared to do that, I think. Did you have anything else, Mark?
I had 1 and 2, or 1 and 3. Or you can do all of them, I don't care, but definitely 1 and definitely 3.
And I definitely agree with Emily. I'm fine with all 3 of them, don't get me wrong. But I really am a fan of the uplighting permanently. I've had so many positive comments about downtown, the lights we have. And I gotta thank Mr. Spade. I think number one, is just fantastic. I would love to see that. We've been a long time waiting. Took a long time to get the July 4th fireworks. It's taken a long time to slowly progress here. It would be wonderful to have that at Christmas time. I like the idea of the silhouettes, what you guys have talked about, believe me. I would just, if I were ranking them, it would be one would be 1, 3 would be 2, and 2 would be 3, ranking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like all three, and,
So we have 25,000 budgeted this year.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
For a project over there, correct?
That's correct. That's in the upcoming budget that you still have to approve.
I imagine the least expensive of all of them, though, would be the silhouettes, right? Because
Right.
you're just placing them, you're gonna place them one way or the other, so.
You still have to get the
The
electrical
ones that have
infrastructure.
power.
Well, the ones that have power, though, wouldn't be an issue. That's not even gonna really be an expense other than just placing them.
But you have funding for option A in this year's budget.
Yes.
That's what it's
we
Yeah,
saying.
so,
Right.
yeah.
And option C would be from,
The program open
Assuming
space
we-
grant that we would probably get later this year.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it'd be
so-
fantastic.
So we can do all three, if we wanted to,
Oh, I think
without,
we want to.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of getting it all done.
Can I pick the music?
No.
We would prefer that somebody pick the music other than Mark and I.
Can it be a
Anything
collaborative
from,
effort?
nice Christmas music to TSO kind of stuff, it's really, the genre of music really would make the difference.
So
can
we're
we have
good?
the uplights done by September so they can be purple?
What?
Pretty,
Probably
please.
I don't know, we'll get our POS grant.
You're right, because if football season starts right around that, so great, then you'll be perfect.
Yes, if that helps, then that's why, yes.
Are you keeping the tree in the middle of the lake? Are you gonna,
We
No.
propose not
Okay.
putting it in there.
because I know it got a lot of, it's not very attractive decorating, so.
Well, and also, I would assume, compared to what Mr. Spade has, it would just sort of be looking strange sitting there.
Okay,
And no
But
one-
that's,
I don't
that's
think
still
anybody-
an option that we can do, if we wanna keep something that's just white, just.
Why can't we put the tree in the lower league?
I was thinking the
Like
same
where
thing.
it used to say, we can still put
Yeah,
a tree
that's
there
no
if
problem.
people, that's where we're kinda, it's a big change. And we're kinda like, okay, do we wanna do all of it, or put that tree there and then say, okay, next year, maybe not want to, or leave it out this year and then maybe say next year we'll put it back. It just,
and maybe not make it like too much, like where it looks gaudy or
And we'll
something. We
definitely-
don't want that.
Oh, I think
definitely
gaudy is
decorated
good for
different.
Christmas.
I
I
put
mean,
it in
gaudy's
the lower-
fine with me.
I put it in the lower
with the
lane.
ability that we're having here, we can decorate that tree different now.
Okay,
the tall.
I know that's what you're after.
I didn't wanna be rude.
Well, we've been wanting to do that for,
Okay.
The tall trees, you said those would go on boats in the lake?
Rafts.
Or on rafts?
we're gonna construct, Parks Department's gonna work in tandem.
Okay.
So we're gonna construct all the rafts that the trees will be on. And then we're gonna supply some manpower to get it, and we're gonna try and make it somewhat, where it's easier to put back up every year.
Yeah.
And get that, so we'll be supplying the rafts and the manpower to help put the lights together. Mr. Spade is gonna basically be an advisor and have the technical assistance that we don't have.
Okay.
So you can get that all together. And that's what I say, if we wanna put the original tree back out, we could even figure out lighting that different.
I put it in
We
the
were
lower
gonna
lane.
try to move the Swan to the lake. I know everybody says, what's that thing sitting in the middle of the lake right now, the dock, but the dock has our fountain on it. And the fountain has to be out of the water in the winter because it'll freeze and bust it.
Gotcha.
So we were gonna move the Swan to that dock, and that way it'll be something on that. So kinda got a wide range of plans trying to get together. And with the POS money, we'll be able to put the infrastructure for the uplighting. We
That'd be
change a
great.
lot of that, and also,
Yeah, that'd be great.
depending on what we have left over with that, we were probably gonna go ahead and do the infrastructure for the silhouettes too, while we were over there working.
Good.
So it's kind of a big jump all at once, but I think long-term,
That's
it's,
the way to do
it's the
it.
way to go.
Yeah.
That's the way to do it. Yeah. That'll get people's attention.
Is this Mr. Spade?
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
for
thank
this.
you.
Thank
And
you.
I just want to say, after going by and seeing your display, the next day, my wife and I decided to ride our bikes by your house in the daylight, because I wanted to see what that power So that power panel on the side of your house, really, you put one on each. So when he turned that on, did our electric department, did something happen?
It's a regional draw that kicks that on. And if I can say one thing, he and I have known each other for, 41 years, worked together. He can do anything, and he does it well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, sounds like a plan.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
We'll work towards it. Thank you.
Fiscal year 20 proposed budget review.
Before I get lost, what page are we on?
I know, right? I'm sorry about all that. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So I have no beautiful slides or sparkly lights, but
No?
we're here to talk about budgets.
We
about
have a
sparkly-
wealth of information. Do we not?
We do. We do have a wealth of information. So this evening, actually, I think Jennifer and I took a little bit of a step back whenever we looked at preparing the memo, and again, trying to be cognizant of all the information that is available, and a lot of the information that we cover in these meetings, we turn the pages quickly. So what we did was take a step back to include the actual copies that were applicable right out of our budget book, so that hopefully it's easier for people to follow along. It's also, on our website, and again, just a little bit more readily available and at people's fingertips. This evening, we're going to concentrate on the general fund, and not to get into any specific department unless there's very detailed questions, or if that's a direction that we wish to go. We're going to start in section 1 and just highlight general fund revenue and go through the categories and what actually is included in these categories, because that's oftentimes a very big question. So in section 1, it's page 31. And the charts in this section are typically, they have 3 columns of information. The first column is fiscal year 19 budget. The next column is where we anticipate we're going to end the year, so what we think we're going to be at by June 30, 2019. And then the third column is what we've included in our fiscal year 20 proposed budget. So again, the very largest revenue source for the general fund, and it comes as no surprise, we've talked about this on multiple occasions, but it's the very first one, and it's property tax revenue. So property tax revenue includes, in this instance, not only our real estate, but also our corporate personal property. And then we have a few pilot contracts, and that revenue is all included in property tax revenue. The chart that's here, again, is at a very abbreviated, summarized level. I'm not going to make you turn your pages, but to go along with the information here, if you go to the general fund section, page 7 starts the revenue. So for every line and every category of revenue that we have listed on the summary chart, there will be a detailed page and a detailed chart with a little bit more information on what makes up that specific income. So fiscal year 20 budget, about 31.9 million out of our total 47.2 in revenue is to be projected from property tax revenue. Again, main assumptions there. We received our constant yield tax notice, and that information comes from the state assessor's office. Just as a reminder and as a little bit of back history on that, the city nor city staff nor anybody affiliated with the city actually makes the assessments. That's all done by the state. The state employs the people, they work the files, they send the files and the information to the city, and then we apply our rate and generate those bills. But literally all we're doing is applying our rate to what the state assessor's office has actually determined those values are. But overall property tax revenue, about 1.2% increase over fiscal year 19 budget. 2 primary factors. The first is remaining at constant yield. So when we first originally got our constant yield about February 14th, it was one combined constant yield notice, and it said overall for all the categories for real estate taxes in the city of Hagerstown, if we maintained where our current rate structure was, we would see a growth in revenue of about 0.5%. And this 0.5% difference is about $131,000 to $134,000. So again, constant yield just means the rate to keep at current revenue dollars. So in order to remain where we have the same dollars for fiscal year 19, we could reduce our tax rate, but again, it's very, 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 very small. And at this point, for fiscal year 20 budget, our recommendation in the budget book is to remain where we're at right now. So that's $131,000 to $135,000. The rest of the growth that you're going to receive reflected from one year to the next is that we are also anticipating, instead of just seeing 0.5%, when we looked at like our 25-year trend and look at what we typically experience in our third and final year of our triennial assessment period, that our growth is hopefully going to be about 1.5%. So we have included that in our calculations of what's included in the fiscal year 20 overall budget. Again, about 69% of all of our revenue in the general fund comes from property tax revenue. The second largest source is this category called income and other taxes. Income and other taxes, all of that revenue comes to us either directly from the state or from the state to the county and back to the city. It includes things like the income tax. So I know one of the things that the county is looking at doing is increasing what that local tax rate is on your state income tax returns. If they change that rate, it also changes the rate for the city. It's automatic. It's not set separately. It's something with across the state that only municipalities cannot set, but the counties have the authority to do so. Other than the state income tax portion, we have included, which is the reason why you're going to see such a, what looks to be large growth from fiscal year 20 budget to fiscal year 19 budget, is we've included $275,000 for the first time in the general fund since about fiscal year 9 or fiscal year 10. This is because we're very fortunate in highway user revenue funding is getting to be restored almost to our historical levels. And because we have went years and years with very reduced amounts, we've attempted to keep several projects going that would have been eligible for highway user money, but we simply didn't have the funding. So instead, we went out and borrowed and issued bonds, and we are able to utilize highway user money to help offset our portion of those eligible projects. So basically, we're using $275,000 to help cover our debt and loan payments for projects that we could have used highway user dollars for if we had had it all those years. Licenses and permits, about $2.1 million of our total budget. The biggest category and the biggest change from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 19 is cable franchise fees. When we projected our fiscal year 20 budget, we left approximately 50%, and typically it's right around $360,000 to $400,000. There's pending FCC regulations and litigation possible, so hopefully we're able to retain that and it would increase our revenue. But again, if not, we think that we have sufficient here to help us maintain and still hit budget. Intergovernmental revenues is just another word for grants. There's not much grant revenue specifically within the general fund aside from some, we had 3 different COPS hiring grants within HPD, and each year as those have phased out and are finishing up, we're going to see our revenue source there drop a little bit further. So that's what you're seeing when you look at fiscal year 20 budget with about $409,000. Charges for current services, that revenue source, again, there's a page in the general fund that will list for you more information and line by line on what those current services are. But the biggest change there is that in the fiscal year 20 budget, we were anticipating receiving more revenue from the county to help reimburse and pay a portion of our Western Maryland Crime Lab expenses, because the city pays for all those expenses, but it's not something that just the city of Hagerstown utilizes. And then the other big change in the charges for current services on the revenue side was a reduction because we removed sponsorship revenue. Again, going from a change of the Blues Fest event to a new Imagine Hagerstown event throughout the month of June. Fines and forfeitures. This category, for the most part, we're seeing a big decrease, and we're seeing that right now. So it's a continuing trend, but it's our speed camera revenue is the biggest impact there and the reason for the reduction. Going to just jump, very last thing is appropriated use of fund balance. And you'll see that in fiscal year 20, we are reallocating or reappropriating $818,000. And again, that $818,000 is money that was a fiscal year 18 general fund surplus, and we're just simply reutilizing it, reallocating it so that we can continue to invest in some capital infrastructure projects. Those are the largest big ticket items on the revenue side and the reason for the majority of the changes. Any questions on revenue? The next two pages, page 32 and page 33, again of the same section, section 1, is on the expenditure side. And again, these charts have the same 3 columns for information. We're going to see fiscal year 19 budget, fiscal year 19 estimated actual, fiscal year 20 proposed budget. The totals on each page are going to be identical. It's just the format and the way that we've categorized. So page 32 is more, I don't want to say per department or function, but technically that's exactly what it is. And much like on the page before when we talked about revenue, this is general fund, and we can see that there's categories like the very first expense category at the top. We separated police and fire because that's typically when we say the term public safety here at the city. Those are really our 2 areas, and there are 2 largest categories when you look at overall what makes up the majority of our general fund. Because the expenses are here, and again, I mentioned just like on the revenue side, when you go to section 2, and you don't have to flip your pages, I'm just doing this for reference. But in section 2, which is the general fund section, starting on page like 16, there's information on the expenses, but it's at a departmental level. So when you look at the individual departments within the general fund, you're going to see department goals, program summaries, important and key statistics each area felt that they keep track of. You're going to see their totals. You're going to see like a mini income statement, their total expenses or total revenues.
Michelle?
Yes.
33,
Yes.
wage and overhead allocations.
Yes.
What are they and what is that?
Sure. So on page 33, it's looking at the expenditures, but instead of looking at it by the departments, it's looking at it by category, so salaries and wages, benefits. Our overhead allocations is here at the city. One of the things that we do is we may have some staff that are within the general fund. So for Rodney's group in Parks is a good example. If they do work over at the golf course, so if we take some of our Parks group and they go over to the golf course to do something, we reallocate and move that portion of their salaries out of that specific line item in that department, and then over in the golf side, you'll see that as the offsetting plus. We do not put that and flow that back through the salary and wages line because we've done that already. We leave it there so that it nets out.
Now I understand. Thank you.
You're welcome. And the largest majority of that is going to be for other areas like in our CMG, our garage. So we do a lot of work for all the vehicles, and I'm taking credit when I say we. It's really Eric and Scott Kaiser and his wonderful group over at CMG. But they work on a lot of vehicles, electric, water, wastewater. So again, it's reducing in the general fund, and then that increase is offset in those other areas. I'm going to just switch this real quick back to page 32. So when we look at overall expenses for the general fund for fiscal year 20 budget, we're looking at $47.2 million. We have there a listing of the departments. About 47% or 22.5 million of all of the general fund expenditures are within the police and fire on the operating side. So again, this is operating only. It does not include any of our capital projects. Next highest is our engineering, parks, and recreation group at 3.8 million, which is about 8.1% of the general fund expenditures. Then the category titled Highways, Streets, and Signal Department at 3.5 million is about 7.3% of the general fund. You're going to notice an increase when that specific category, Highway, Streets, and Signal Department, of about $160,000 from fiscal year 20 budget to fiscal year 19. And one of the reasons why is we took a step back and we said, okay, let's identify what stormwater operating expenses that we currently have and are doing that are within our general fund operations. And so as we did that, we identified current staff. So there were some in the engineering department who would be like a gym vendor who is very vital and key, a percentage of his time. So again, all of that is reflected in stormwater, and it's the majority of the reason you see this increase in Highway, Streets, and Signal Department for fiscal year 20 budget. The fourth largest category overall is our debt. And our debt service there just means what we're paying in a single year total for all of our general fund bonds and loans. So about $2.9 million, that's almost at the bottom, or overall 6.1% of our total general fund expenses for next year. And that's an increase over fiscal year 19 of about $263,000. And primarily that's related to our current $3.1 million 2019 bond that we're working on right now, as well as anticipating when we looked at building out all the priorities and the capital projects for fiscal year 20, the need to issue another debt again later, calendar 2019 or calendar 2020 for fiscal year 20. But when you look at, again, by department or area, those are the four largest categories. If instead on page 33, again, numbers are completely the same, but taking another look and not necessarily looking at a department or an individual division, but looking at overall categories like salaries and wages and benefits, and that is at the very top, you're going to see that's about $30.5 million, or 64.6% of all of our expenses. So the majority of all of our expenses, almost 65%, are in salary and wages and employee benefits. The next largest category is contracted services, and that's about 11% at almost $2 million for fiscal year 20. And we are anticipating a growth in fiscal year 20 in our contracted services of about $123,000. The majority of the increase there has to do with some legal fees, increased contractual services as we continue to get our red light program up and running. And then also we've included money there for a cost study for phase 2 of our stormwater management that we're looking at and working toward right now. And then the third category, again, matches what we said earlier on the other slide, was our annual debt service. So again, when we look at it either by department or division, or if we look at it by the type of expense, it's still 6.1%, which is a pretty large percentage of all of our general fund expenditures. I do want to point out at the very bottom of this chart, we have things called capital outlay, non-CIP, and that's mostly computers and desks and things that are not individually $5,000, but again, still something that's going to last longer than a year. Operating transfers to other funds, capital transfers to other funds, and then you'll see the fund balance transfers to the CIP. When I look at those four things and compare them from fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 20 budget, they're changing from a total of $2.5 million to a total of $2.9 million, so about $400,000. And that's, again, primarily because we are fortunate enough to be able to have a fiscal year 18 surplus that we've reprogrammed to allow us to use to continue to do some projects in fiscal year 20.
The transfers to other funds, there's
Yes.
an increase there.
Yes, so the transfers to other funds on the operating side, the majority of that $975,000 is all being transferred over to economic redevelopment to be utilized for a variety of incentives. So that's at a much higher rate than what we did in fiscal year 18.
Okay.
Any specific questions yet?
I think that when you look at the figures on page 33, while you've separated out salaries and wages and employee benefits, and even I guess you could add in the wage and overhead allocation. I mean, most of those are obligated to, your personnel-oriented administrative costs. But then when you go down through the categories, there's really only 5 categories that I see that are of a nature that have some flexibility. Obviously your materials, your supplies and utilities have some flexibility. Your advertising and printing, your professional development, your communication expense, and your other general expense. Beyond that, the other ones in this chart are a fairly static obligation that you've constructed within the budget, and to a degree are service-driven or personnel, obligated to be there. Of those 5, out of a $47 million budget, those 5 make up about $4 million. And then when you figure about, 70% of that is still going to be, personnel operations driven, it leaves you with about $1 million. So at the end of the day, within the revenue side on pages 30, 31, and on the expense side, you're really limited to a flexible sort of massaging of the figures by about $1 million. I don't, to the average taxpayer, that's 4 cents. Or to the average taxpayer, it's 4 times $12. Every $12 is, a penny, and so that's, about $48. So that's really what you're talking about. Out of a $47 million budget, what you have the ability to maneuver, some savings in to the folks out there that, that have an interest in the city sort of saving money. The amount's about $50 on the average person's $1,200 tax bill.
So Michelle's talked all the numbers, shown you lots of figures. So we decided last year, with the help of Eric Hastings, to put kind of a more visual effect to these general fund expenditures. So in your packet, you'll find where does your money go? And again, this gets down to the FY20 proposed general fund expenditures, and basically just takes a snapshot of the biggest categories that are listed. And again, it gets back to your $47.2 million in general fund expenditures for FY20. Goes into the general government's $6.2 million in the proposed budget, and per some suggestions from the council, we've added a kind of a description out there to indicate what general government has included in it, so people know exactly what kind of expenses are running through there. And then you have highways and streets at 2.8 million, parks and rec at 2.7, public safety, which again, as Michelle said, is your police and fires at 24.7. Transfers are at 2.7, unallocated and debt services expenses are at 4.6. Waste collection is at 2.5, and community economic development is at $607,000. So again, gives you a more visual. The percentages are based on how much percentage of each category's expenses are to the total proposed that we have out there. Currently on our website is listed the FY19 general fund expenditures. So once we adopt the budget, we'll then update the website with the current FY20 general fund budgeted expenditures. Again, this is just a quick visual, kind of gives you a perspective of exactly where these expenses are being spent to.
And kind of flows right along with that, but I'm going to point everybody to section 2, which is the general fund section of the budget book. And I apologize that I didn't think to include those pages with this. But pages 1 and 2. So pages 1 and 2 of section 2, again, is general fund, very, very top. Once we hit all the individual sections, we do a little bit more information. So instead of just providing budget and estimated actual for the current year, we've also included some history. So here going forwards throughout the rest of the budget book, you're going to see at least 1 year's history. And here we've included fiscal year 18 actual. The actual numbers are audited numbers. To kind of coordinate at the very, very top, again, is all that general fund revenue. So again, fiscal year 20 budget, total of $47.2 million is the exact same figures, exact same categories that we just went through in the first chart. But then when you start looking at the expenses, it's broken down by departments, and you're going to see the very first subtotal says total general government of $6.2 million. That literally is a listing of every single area that makes up the total that goes along with this pretty graphic in the chart. The title, general government, again, and what falls there isn't necessarily something that Jennifer or I pick. It literally goes back to GASB, what General Accounting Standards Board specifically contact and call. And so you're going to see that a lot of times, and as we go through a little bit further, you're going to see the things like public safety. And so when outside of when we internally talk public safety everywhere else when we have to do for reporting purposes doesn't include just police and our fire departments in our division, but it also includes the code administration area as well as our signal department. So again, this page 1 and 2 is very nice detail. It gives you a lot of information, and it is still at a summary level. As you turn the pages and follow the rest of the entire section, you're going to see details on every single line as you go. You see the detail on the revenue, which we kind of went through. You're going to see details on all these individual departments if it's something that you're looking specifically for. But again, general fund section, section 2, for those who are looking for that detailed level of information. The other thing on page 2 in the general fund, you'll see at the very, very bottom. So again, $47.2 million is what's included in the fiscal year 20 proposed budget. Total expenditures and transfers, $47.2 million. So as of right now, with everything that was included in the proposed budget, we're looking at a little bit more than break even, so $1,443. As a reminder, we talk a lot about fund balance and fund balance reserve. We've also included in here information. Now again, our fund balance information is here so that we can see that. If you look at fiscal year 18 actual, that's where we were audited. From there, all the rest is best guess. So it's, you know, as long as everything ends exactly where we think it's going to for fiscal year 19 and for fiscal year 20, it also looks at things like how much we're going to have in purchase orders and have obligated in other places. But so with everything, when it's all said and done in fiscal year 20, with reutilizing and repurposing that $818,000 that was a surplus from fiscal year 18, our ending fund balance in the general fund, we're anticipating to still be at $10.4 million. And then if you come down just slightly below that, is the different categories that make up fund balance. And the one really that we have more flexibility in utilizing and doing things with is the unassigned, and we're anticipating that's going to be about 8.3 of the 10.4 million, which is 18.7% of total annual expenditures, or about 2.2 months. Again, including that information is important. It's important for everybody sitting here, but it's not important just from that standpoint, because as the council member pointed out, You know, I don't typically say things like, let's utilize our fund balance reserve. We're doing this and still keeping an eye on our fund balance and retained earnings policy. Question? All right. Somebody's giggling at me, so I just thought. The last thing that I think that we want to talk about, and then I'm going to turn things over, is a lot of conversations. Since the budget, we've had a lot of big things hit, like talk of the stadium, a lot of our contributions. We just had the Maryland Theater come in a few weeks ago, and we want to give more money to them. So I think from the standpoint of where we are for fiscal year 20 budget, we're in a good place. We can certainly come back right now and determine where we want that funding to come from the Maryland Theater, because again, it's a priority we've all identified, and we want to make that happen. And then going forwards, if we're ready to have conversations and make decisions on all these other things, we could try to squeeze them in, or we could continue to review the budget, knowing that these other conversations and discussions and contributions may take a longer bit of time to flesh out and know exactly a goal or a direction. Once this budget is approved and even adopted in May, we still have the ability in June, July, the whole way through next year to reallocate and move funding around as this group sees fit. So okay. All right, so agency contributions in section 2 on page 57, and we did stop to include a copy of that. But again, knowing that we need to reallocate $100,000 to give towards the Maryland Theater for its expansion project, took a step back to say, big picture, where were the areas really that would not have a direct impact necessarily on an individual department, because we've already worked with all of our directors and asked for numerous levels of cuts before we produce this book. So three areas that we could think of is, the first is within economic redevelopment. Again, we're doing $975,000 for all of our different incentives. So yes, this is money for the Maryland Theater, and yes, it's for an expansion, but it's also, when we take a step back and think about economic development and incentive and putting people where we need to see them in downtown revitalization, it fits in that area. So we have $975,000 there that's already in the budget that we could look to utilize for things like that. We also, as another option, have agency contributions, and again, it's page 57 in section 2, and I did include it in the packet so that we could see right now where those agencies were and what was included for the proposed budget of that $210,000. And then the last thing that I did go ahead and include, because it was one suggestion that had been brought forth, was just go ahead and reduce further in our capital projects. Well, we have to be careful, so I can't just say reduce a project, because a lot of funding sources wouldn't have necessarily direct bearing on the budget, because there's grant funding, there's highway user money, and that still wouldn't help us get the money that we needed to reallocate and shift for the $100,000 for the Maryland Theater. So I included specifically the projects that had general fund transfers, and that was about $688,625. Again, I'm going to say that's my least favorite of all the options, and not one that I would recommend at this time. A lot of those projects are very small projects, and some of them, the funding from the general fund and our local dollars are matches for hoping to secure state funding.
But you feel that the $100,000 fits under the economic incentive program, right?
I do, but instead of $100,000, I found $32,000. So now we're talking $68,000, and the $32,000 is from an unspent bond. So again, doesn't change any of my budget numbers, doesn't change anything else that's included here. So $68,000 would need to be found and either reallocated or in some manner.
And Mr. Mayor, we've had some, excuse me, some discussions internally among each other and also publicly about some of our agency contributions. And to me, the one that stands out like a sore thumb is CRS. I can't say enough good things about this agency and this organization. What I can say right now, though, is Community Rescue Squad has a surplus fund, like they have a reserve fund, we have a reserve fund. To my knowledge, they're not using their reserve fund for operational expenses. But we're gonna take money from our reserve fund to give to them so they can use our reserve fund for operational expenses. I'm a little senile in remembering exactly who was sitting around this table and who was mayor when, I don't know if you were, Bob, when we did the 50. And then you know I was the loudest proponent of that 50,000 funding to CRS. But we did that at a time that CRS was practically broke, had the reality of going under. If CRS were in that condition now, we may have to give them more than 50,000. If CRS came to us now and said, we have no more reserve fund and we need a new ambulance and we need money for it, we would be in a position to have to fund it. And this is not being said in a vacuum. The other thing that we have to acknowledge, which we have been doing around this table, is the crisis in fire and rescue. And we know that this is an organization like our fire department that needs fair funding from the county. And the more that we supply city taxpayer funds from our reserve fund, the less we take the heat off those who are responsible for the appropriate funding. And if anybody knows, please speak up. We've seen Smithsburg's rescue squad in crisis, right? Is Smithsburg contributing any money to Smithsburg Fire and Rescue? Boonesborough, does Boonesborough contribute any?
They do.
How much do they contribute, do you know?
About 1% toward those services. Typically, it's somewhere between $1,000 and $3,000.
That includes their fire, correct?
Yes.
How about Smithsburg? Any idea about Smithsburg?
About the same. So when I did that chart that I gave when we met with the county commissioners, the average is about 1% to 3%. The county is the second highest to the city at 4%. The city is at 17%.
But I would be fascinated to see what those percentages would be if you cut out what the fire department was getting, because every one of those organizations is right. Every one of those is fire and rescue.
Good luck finding out.
Well, you won't.
Absolutely no
You won't.
accountability.
But I need to say, because I can already hear the criticism of, you know, you're funding this and you're funding that. How could you take away funding from your rescue squad? And if I thought that that would impair their operations, we would have a whole different discussion. But again, I think taking money from our reserve fund for their operations is not something that makes a lot of sense for us in this day and age right now as we sit here. And I have some other ideas on some minor reallocations on that, and I might as well say it right now. Of all the agencies on here, unless I'm wrong, I think there is only one agency who receives 100% of its funding from the city, and that's the Hagerstown Municipal Band. And because of that, it would be my position that we should not cut a penny from prior year's funding for that organization. And because I think it's only $1,000, there's a bunch of different places that you could find $1,000 to reallocate that wouldn't be a significant damage to any of these other organizations. But again, that's the only one, to my knowledge, that gets 100% of their funding from us. And thank you.
I think the funding to the library is also very important. You know, they go over what our funding does for them each year. And while it's not 100% of their budget, it is a very significant impact on what they do.
I don't disagree.
If we wanted to increase the contribution to, say, the Maryland International Film Festival, where would that come from?
Right now, we do that through sponsorships on our event side. So
And we'll-
that's within the events, let's see if you flip.
It's
If we,
1,500
yeah,
currently.
page 58, section 2. So it's through our events, and some of the things, again, that help offset the cost of what we put in expenses for events is some of our hotel motel tax now revenue. Very, very, very small dollars. But I would say if we're looking to move monies around for an event, that we try to do it within the $200,000 plus that we have in all events, unless you're talking big dollars that we need to add to the budget and find from somewhere
So
else.
where are we there on the, I'm trying to find the marijuana. Oh, here it is, film festival, okay. So we've got nothing proposed in 2020?
Actually, the film festival, so it used to, one of the things that we looked at doing to make it a little bit more efficient and to give greater flexibility, you'll see a number of events that look like they have zeros in fiscal year 20 when compared to prior years, but the majority of all those were simply moved to a miscellaneous downtown event line item that is sitting at a total of $38,450. Really, the only difference on the expense side in the events, and I think Jill's back here, was looking at changing the expense side for the removal of the Blues Fest event.
Yeah, because I would really, I mean, just from the turnout and the comments and how positive that film festival event was, I would really like to see us try to find $6,000 or something to fund that with an additional
So
Well,
six.
I think
6,000.
that- I mean, we sort of go back and forth over the eras of this conversation, but I think that the events-oriented or activities-oriented items that you're looking to give public money to are much different than the contributions to other agencies that are functioning in a quasi-public manner that provides some sort of public, a service, that you would otherwise maybe attempt to provide.
And that's why Michelle's saying take it out of the
Events.
miscellaneous downtown events line.
Yeah.
I have a question about the Discovery Station. I was under the impression that that $2,500 was a sponsorship for the new addition. I can't remember what the name of the
The
section.
downtown. Actually, when we wrote the motion, we literally wrote it that it was going to be considered in parcel underneath our agency contributions for 3 years. So we did $2,500 in fiscal year 19, $2,500 for 20, and then $2,500 again for fiscal year 21. So you're saying you
So
thought
I
of it
thought-
more of a sponsorship
Well,
instead of an agency contribution.
Right, because it was for a certain area of the Discovery Station where they actually, it was for City Park that they had.
Discovery Towners.
Discovery Town, that's right.
Whatever the title
That's
was.
exactly right. So would that have been in the event or sponsorship come from that bucket rather than this agency contribution?
I think it would fall under the
But
same
we-
thing, the agency contract.
Really?
Because we did it as a motion and we wrote it in and we.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think we did that because we had in fiscal year 19 in our current year, we had more dollars that we left here as unspecified to give mayor and council flexibility throughout the
And
year.
we also did it because that's how it was presented to us by the Discovery Station, as I recall. They wanted to be one of the
Kinda like our
core,
HVAC.
core agency groups. And so I think that's how it was always discussed.
And at one point, we did agency contributions for them in the
A
past.
while ago, okay. Because there could have been your municipal band.
Well, I
You know?
think, yeah, there's places in here for that,
Okay.
though.
I only want to add to the CRS conversation, since I am on their board. I disagree with taking their funding, but in this fashion. But I think that this is part of a much larger conversation that I don't know what we have to do to have this conversation with the county. We've mailed a letter now. Apparently, they're drafting a response. We keep asking to have this conversation about fire rescue, EMS, all of it with the county. Our $400,000 that goes to the 911 center, kind of all of this is intertwined. And they need to come to the table and we need to have that conversation. So I think we need a joint meeting I mean, it's a fiasco, what is happening over there. There's like no accountability to where our tax dollars are going, absolutely none, across the board. And I think it's time to figure out what differential we're getting, why, actual numbers to it, if we're going to continue giving that $400,000 to the 911 center. You know, if they're going to provide our volunteer stations equal funding, what role Community Rescue Service is going to have in this transfer of, are they going to become a county entity or not? I just think these are conversations that are happening sporadically all over the place right now, and we need answers as a city, since we are the largest provider of fire, and CRS is the largest provider of EMS, and they're located, running the majority of the calls in our city. We need some answers.
Well, and
So
that
I
would make,
think that ties into that bigger conversation that should have been had a long time ago.
Well, just to make it clear, that conversation has been attempting to be
Yeah.
had
No.
for
A long time.
close to 30 years.
oh my.
Well, when I was vice president of CRS, before I was a member of this body, if I'm correct. And we had the same problems then. That's why CRS almost went broke, was lack of funding. But I was vice president when Ron Horn was president, and we moved the station from Franklin Street to where it is now. And the same problems existed, and as strange as it sounds for me to say I want to cut their funding, I sort of want to cut their funding to try to expedite what has taken, it's getting ready. And the more we let this fester and say, well, maybe they'll talk to us if there's not a crisis, Smithsburg goes in crisis and people react to it.
Yeah, this whole
and-
county's in a crisis.
And we're not taking money from CRS that will change their operational status. What it will change is them having, if they needed to take money from their reserve fund, which is exactly what we're doing.
Right.
That's my problem. If we had a surplus of money here, but we're taking money from our reserve fund to do something that we're not supposed to do with our reserve money, to use it for operations. If we told Michelle we were taking $44,000 from the reserve fund to pay salaries, she'd say, you can't do that. But that's exactly what we're doing. We're taking the money from our reserve fund and giving the CRS to pay salaries. It doesn't make financial sense. And it doesn't help get this problem solved.
Now, and when you speak about the 400,000 for the 911 center, you know, I was mayor when we agreed to that agreement, but had no idea it was going to be in perpetuity.
You're correct
You know,
about
I
that.
mean, we had, we did it because we were transferring personnel
Yep.
to the 911 center to help cover that cost. And now that's been 12, 14 years, probably. So, you know, I have to agree with Kristen that it's high time that has to come to an end. But while we're on contribution to other agencies,
Sure.
I notice in here that the Dolman Black Heritage Museum, there's nothing allocated for 2020. And I've had some conversations, we've had conversations about how we could secure that building for them and do it where we're protected if at such a time they could not come through with the project. And I've been told that we have funds available to be able to finalize that purchase and put together an agreement that would protect the city of Hagerstown.
My recommendation would be that it's from the economic incentives, and that it's written in such a way that once we receive our funding back, it goes right back into there to be utilized as another incentive and ongoing.
Sure.
Again, you know, there's multiple different incentives that we offer. Some staff can do, some we can't. Some it's at the direction of the administrative body sitting here. Customized incentives is one of those. This kind of feels like a customized incentive.
Right, and Michelle and Jennifer and I have had numerous conversations on this and other topics. So what it actually does financially for us, for fiscal year 20 proposed, right now we stood at $210,000 for agency contributions. We had $9,000 in for the Maryland Theater, so we need $91,000 to fund that. 108 which would put us at a total of $409,000. And as Michelle said, we would have the motion written as such, designating the funding source, which we can certainly do. And we started a little discussion earlier that it was one of our little jokes between she and I with my situation, that we would use a thing called a mid-year adjustment between accounts, but that can occur on accounts in the city to move funding around if we need it in another place. So I'm sure that Michelle, Scott, and this group will be able to find the financial resources if we need them mid-year for something that does come up.
I don't actually think that, I don't think that's the right number now, considering that 68,000.
So
I
would
gave,
say-
yeah, and it is less, because if you use the 68,000, if you take the 44, the numbers get in, we would only need 24,000 to find
Right.
for that, but we're using the 32, it takes us down 32 less than that. So.
Okay.
So I found 32,000 of the 100 grand. Another, I would say, right off the bat, it's $100,000, again, economic incentive. We got 975,000 going there. We would say, out of the 975, 50 of that is for the Maryland Theater. Now we need about 17,900 to allocate in here in these agency contributions across this group. Because I think that the Maryland Theater's 9,000 is for their ongoing operations. The 100,000 that they are looking is they want separately $300,000 to be unrestricted specifically for what they need in
Over
their
the next 3 years,
expansion.
correct.
Expansion, and then there's still a funding gap. So again, if we're good with doing 32,000, because I found it and you trust me, and it doesn't hit anything that's here, and 50,000 out of incentives, then 17,900 between here, but again, we'd have to agree on how that looks.
I mean, I don't think it's that complicated to identify, and I want to try to address at least my thoughts on a couple of those items.
Sure.
The first is the Maryland Theater, the $100,000. I know that, you know, that there's a larger interest in that. I just am of the personal perspective, I'd rather play it sort of slow and steady, and $100,000 a year for each of the 3 years we commit, just like we did with the North High Stadium and other, entities that look for those types of chunks of money. So that's my preference on that.
That's what we agreed to, right?
Versus finding, right,
And,
okay, yeah.
and then on CRS, just my 2 cents. I think you cut it in half. I think you got to do something to show that there's some level of seriousness from the city, that the county, recognize that, fire rescue EMS service is a county obligation. It is for, all 23 counties across the state. We're one of 3 municipalities out of 157, providing this level of service for this particular service left in the state. And I think it's important to note that the other 2 entities, both Cumberland and Salisbury, they get a significant return from their respective counties on that investment in fire rescue EMS that they contribute as a municipality to those, and Annapolis, I'm sorry. And then on the Dolman Black Heritage Museum, I was fairly clear in the public discussion we had with that entity. I'm committed to that $108,000 to secure that building, and I was pretty clear as well that if they can't make a go of it, we provide provision that we dispose of that building through sale or whatever. And I'll be honest, I understand it's a $108,000 gamble. They might not end up succeeding. We may not end up getting our $108,000 back for a building. But the alternative is they don't make it happen because we do nothing. And that building sits there in the condition that it's sitting in for, who knows when. And for me, $108,000 is a pretty good risk to entertain, especially given the level of sort of state and federal interest that we've heard politically, frankly, expressed in that. And the reality is, you can't move on that unless you have a place established to put it. And I'd even go a step further to say, and I've said this to the folks, with the museum, and I think I've said it here, I think there has to be some incentive. So let's say, we say, look, we're gonna give you whatever the number is, 24 months, 36 months, whatever the number is, we're gonna give you this amount of time to accomplish securing other funding sources to make, to make this vision happen. And at the end of the day, let's say it takes them 2 years to line up, the state and federal resources that we've heard politically, exist for this commitment. I'll be real honest, you come back to the table as that museum entity, and you say, look, we've secured $500,000 in state and federal money to make this happen. I'm gonna tell you, great job, we're gonna waive the $108,000. And that's just me, because I feel like then that gamble is paid off and they've delivered on what they've attempted to deliver on, and we write that off, and we make something great out of it. And I don't think that's any different than our commitment to any other type of venue that we have around town, like the Maryland Theater, or any other of these places that we're doing to bring people in.
Just going back to what you said about just doing community rescue service, cutting that contribution in half. To Lou's point, I don't see any point in not cutting it all together right now. We're not doing anything based on the status of their reserve and their surplus funds. We're not going to have suddenly an incident where the ambulance can't go out because nobody's there to be paid to drive it. We're looking at all these agency contributions as these snapshot point in times. In other words, we're looking at Dolman, 108,000. That's not a year after year after year thing. That's a point in time, one-shot deal, as is the Community Rescue Service, a point in time, one-shot deal. If we get to this table next year at this time and suddenly Community Rescue Service is really hurting, then we have the opportunity to say, okay, let's turn back the spigot on and put another 50,000 in this coming year, or help build their reserve fund. But if they have the reserve fund and it's there to use, let them use it, and let's channel the taxpayers' money into more worthwhile projects for right now.
I guess for me, I heard Michelle say, we're looking for 17.9.
Right, that's certainly.
And I was
Well,
like, okay.
18,900, so I can
half.
give the 1,000 back to the municipal
Let's
band,
do
I'm so
half, and
sorry.
let's not sort of, use this group that's providing a fairly necessary service
And I have no
as sort of a
problems-
pawn in the
I
process.
have no problems with that theory either. I mean,
If you said, hey, I need 50, I'd probably have a different mindset toward that than when you say, hey, I need 17.
I don't disagree.
I think half is,
Mike threatened me. He said, you have to find money, Michelle. I said, oh,
Well, what you're
okay.
telling us is you have found it. And when I think about the Maryland International Film Festival, all I can say is next year, the Maryland Theater is gonna be up and running.
That's
And
gonna
when we
be-
talk about venues.
You talk
and,
about,
boy,
yeah.
it's gonna be one. And so to some degree, we can say that we are funding that festival through our funding of the Maryland Theater. I have no
Well,
problem.
just so you know, I brought that up last week when Austin brought up, he had a conversation with the executive director of the
Tracy.
Maryland National Film Festival. I will tell you that I had a very blunt conversation with her myself this past week. She makes a compelling case to be able to help keep that film festival here as opposed to move it to a different venue east of us over the mountain. I believe that in Jill's budget, we could find a total of $6,000.
Is that what she's
would
asking for?
definitely- That would, put it this way, she wrote a check out of her checking account to cover cost for the film festival because, in the county, keep in mind, the county's contribution is minimal.
No, listen, Mayor,
So that has to be something we have to work on too.
A couple of things I'd say. One, I haven't mentioned it, but I certainly agree with Christian on Dolman. Two, I have no problems with asking staff to find money. One of the things I was gonna say is I haven't heard that there was a request for that additional funding.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out where that number was
And
coming
if there
from.
is that request, and listen, there came a time, And I guess we still fund, right, Miss Maryland, or not?
We do, yes.
Yes.
We had the same situation
Oh,
come
yeah,
up
we
with
definitely
Miss
do.
Maryland, is, listen, if you don't give us the money for it, we're gonna have to find another place, and yeah, we cannot afford to lose that film festival, especially with what's going to be in this town next year.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And I think as it relates to that, I was surprised when I went back to look at, because you have to submit the reports on the hotel motel tax usage. Municipalities submit a report to the county every year. This is what we spend it on. I have to tell you, and I'm not, please don't take this the wrong way, because I'm sitting at this table, as one of the people approving the budget each year. I was surprised to see in those reports, and I hadn't seen them before, I think the total amount's like $180,000 or
Very
whatever.
small, yes.
In total hotel, but a huge lion's share of that, year over year, was devoted to Blues Fest,
Yes,
every year.
prior years. Yes.
Yeah, and so all I'm saying is, I think that as these activities, become more competitive, I think that it's important for this body to have an awareness of how that hotel motel money, the city's portion, is getting distributed among those events and activities. I mean, we're getting, I think I saw the one report, we were getting like 176,000, and 130,000 of it went to the Blues Fest.
We can send those
That was a
out.
shocking number for me. Not that it was a bad thing, because it was a huge event, just that, to have that awareness.
And so typically what has happened historically is with the revenue, all that revenue is spent each year. I mean, we get such a small amount. So if we haven't,
Unlike other municipalities.
that is very true. We don't grow our balance, it's not used for any type of administrative allocation. So what happens is, if we have not come forth and said, okay, specifically this year, all of our hotel motel revenue has to be utilized as extra incentives. If we haven't specifically designated it, by default, the city's always just utilized it for our events, because we spend way more in our events than what we get in hotel
Yes.
motel revenue. And that is eligible expenses.
I can remember a conversation that I had years ago with the executive director of the Maryland Theater and the then president of the board, who wanted to come to council and request operating funds. And I said, we don't do operating funds. We do projects. If you want to do, this is when they needed a roof. I said, you need a roof. Come ask for help with the roof. That way it saves you money, and you can use that money for your operating expenses. And what did they do? They came to this table and asked for a roof, or for operating funds, and not a roof. And we denied it, because we don't do that.
And we
You know?
funded the roof.
We do the roof.
The county did.
Yeah, but, yeah, right, exactly.
We did the roof.
No, we didn't, no, because they didn't ask for that.
So
Right.
for staff, then, for us to move forward, do we have a consensus, a nod of the head? I think you've given us that for the Maryland Theater, and then for the Dolman Black Heritage Museum.
Yes.
Is that part of the fiscal year 20 budget,
For
or
part
are we
of-
coming back later to
Yeah,
do
for,
that?
for us
Are
to
we ready
designate in
tonight?
20, as Michelle said. So what we can do is have a motion prepared with the funding source, if everyone's in agreement, just for staff, or how we move forward.
Need to put this to bed and
So I guess I'm just confused at the last conversation we had regarding the museum. I thought we had left with particular action items to figure out how to move forward. And are we acquiring the building? I think there's still a lot of questions, and we had asked questions of them as well. Then
I think this would just be the funding source designation. Any agreement would come later. This is just to make sure the funding's designated out of the budget. I would see a separate agreement for how the money was utilized that would be formulated later.
Well, Kristen had a conversation that I had with him revolved specifically around how this would be structured, and that we would, the building, we would finish the purchase of the building with 108, and then they would have, in an agreement with the city of Hagerstown, a certain period of time to be able to bring that project to fruition, move forward on it or whatever. And if that didn't happen, then the building would revert to the city of Hagerstown, and then we would have ownership of the building to do what we needed to do with it, or felt like we wanted to do with it.
I guess my question is, who decided that? because we left the
Well,
last
that's what we're
meeting.
asking you right now, at this table.
Because I think that's important to know. I'm not saying I'm opposed to funding it, but I think the specifics are important to know in the last
Well, I
conversation.
believe there has to be an agreement, you're right. And there
Well,
has to be
there's
specifics.
a contractual agreement that has to be ironed out.
I
And
think that that's
I think
important.
this
I
table
think they
needs
would
to
agree
look
that
at.
that's important. I think we all would agree that that's important. I
Yes.
don't- So I guess I'm confused as to what we're asking for right now,
To
because there
put
was
the
a lot
money
of
in the
what
budget.
ifs.
Allocate the money.
If the money's not in the budget, then we can't have the agreement worked out later, because there's no money in the budget to do that.
Well, so there's $975,000 total dollars in incentives. So what we can do is say, okay, let's do a timeout, and let's ask Jill to set aside and know to not spend the first $108,000 and give everybody time to continue the discussions, come up with a contract and the agreement until such a point, and once that's done, then we can do the motion, knowing that we have the funding. The funding's
Funding's there.
the 975 is there, we're just asking staff not to go ahead and come July 1 to spend it on other incentives. We can do that without a motion, if that's the direction tonight.
So-
Unless we're ready for a vote.
Because it's coming from the incentives.
That's my recommendation.
So, you provided another chart here, the economic incentive
Yes.
chart. And in that chart, it looks like under, line 4, if you go all the way over to the column, it has a breakdown of a number of Invest Hagerstown, and then you've got your other economic redevelopment fund, PEP and some others. For me, that gets, for what you're sort of outlining, that gets me to that question that I asked a few weeks back, which is, you know, and I was sincere when I said this, last year when we adjusted the tax rate, the impetus was it was going to produce an amount of revenue that we could then reinvest in these various incentive offerings for big buildings and little buildings and businesses and folks that want to buy, you know, homes that have been sitting empty and landlords that want to grab, half doubles and apartments and fix them up, you know, to try and sort of lift all the ships together. The amount you're throwing out there, the 975, is that amount?
So actually, no, 975 is more
Right,
than
'cause it
what
was
we're
like
getting for
818
that.
or
for that.
850
It's-
or something.
As long as you tell me it's not less, because I didn't
It's
want us to
not
adjust the
less.
rate,
Not less, yeah.
It is
and then
not
us sort of
less.
start siphoning that off like politicians often
No,
do.
and
And spend
actually.
it on other things.
So, and again, so you were saying for incentives, so one of the reasons we did this chart was so that it didn't just show what we're transferring to economic redevelopment, but it's all of our incentives. So in the general fund, we have this 35,000 as well. But again, if we look at the increase in the, revenue dollars that we're going to get, it is like not even $815,000
Okay.
for the apartments.
Right.
Grand total. So
No,
975
no, not just apartments. We adjusted the tax rate
And the apartments.
Yes.
for the apartments, homes. We adjusted the tax rate in total and then created that tiered system.
And that came to about 815 last year.
Right.
And now
All I'm
it's
saying is
975.
whatever that total number is for FY '20, it should be
More than what,
outlined, or it should be allocated to these investment
Yeah.
redevelopment programs.
yeah.
Right, it's 3 cents, wasn't it?
Well, it was
3
three, it
cents
was
and
like
then
three and,
35.
yeah, it was like 3 and 5 or something.
And the,
You should be able to know that, you know what I mean? We should be able to know that number and say, yep, we've got these programs covered.
And so.
If it's
grand-
not, then what we're doing is we're taking that money and we're spending it on operations and
And
that.
grand total, the state's saying we might get growth of 0.5%, and I started with, that's grand total additional revenue over current year of
I got you.
131,000.
Some portion of which would be that
Yes.
adjusted rate. Some small portion.
Very small portion.
Yeah, like 10
So
grand.
this 975 plus the 35,000 we have in economic incentives
Okay.
within the general fund, plus some of these others that we do across the city is more than that number.
I just don't want that to get lost.
No,
No.
I
No,
have a
and
separate
which is
chart.
the
where
only
I'm-
reason I
right
think
here.
everyone agreed to that last
Okay.
year.
Yeah.
now, once we go through and look at, finalize what we want to do in our contributions to other agencies and finalize our functions, then that's going to reduce probably that 800K right there, or
actually, I'm saying that's where I'm recording it. It's part of that. So instead of it necessarily being city center, it's gonna be a customized incentive, but it's going to be in an incentive category. $108,000.
For the Dolman Black Heritage.
The $108,000, I'm not gonna
Okay.
I'm not showing it as an agency contribution.
It's like under Invest Hagerstown.
It's much more of a capital contribution.
Yeah,
Because it's for the purchase of a building.
does make sense.
It's a one-time use, right?
It makes sense to come from that.
And we're very specific on how we wanna write it in the language in which we're writing it.
And that's what I said, I think that there's gotta be an incentive that says, hey,
See, that's the word
you
you're
bring,
using,
you
right?
bring it forward, you know, you bring, you know, your project vision money to the table in a certain time frame, and you know, you get that benefit. Of course, I know it's for another administration to decide, you know, but I think we can put that in some, or, you understand, the stick side, which is, you know, 24, 36 months, whatever that number is, nothing's resulted, you know, we can't, I don't wanna be sitting on, you know.
An almshouse.
An almshouse, or, well, then we can go back further, the one that just got torn down, over here on Washington. You know, that was another city sort of, partnership, building. I don't want, you know, that to be
Right.
the case.
But I think
Talking about the Delta Hosiery building.
Right, where, you know, where we said, you gotta do this in 18 months, or else we're taking the building back, and 20-some years later, we never took the building back.
It wasn't 20, but yeah.
Whatever, 18,
just to reemphasize Emily's point though, is what we're talking about is allocating the money to do this, and then I think we need to all come back to the table and review the wording of the contract and make sure that we're all comfortable.
Let legal put the contract. Yep.
Because it was a bit of a surprise.
Okay.
Okay, so wait a second. I am coming back with the motion.
No, what we
Okay.
have is you have the
We're
money
just gonna issue
funding.
the money.
What we
Perfect,
need
thank you.
is the agreement, because the money's not gonna be spent till we have the agreement.
right.
Very good.
If you don't get an agreement, it doesn't work out, you put it in
Right.
some other part of the incentive and say, hey, you know, it's gonna be in the home buying.
Combine or another.
Just like we moved moved money earlier this year.
And then for the $100,000 for fiscal year 20 for the Maryland Theater, we're willing to take community rescue service from 44,000 to 25,000. And then the rest of the funding, which I have to, no?
I'm not, but
Yeah, everybody else is.
I just
Emily's
wanted it on
gotta
the
go to the
record that I am not.
Emily's gotta get it.
Yeah, we understand her
You're
position.
not willing to reduce it at all?
What do we subsidize in their
Not right
gas,
now, I
in
think
their
it's
diesel
part of a much
purchase?
bigger conversation we need to have.
Do you know?
I thought we couldn't have that conversation unless we,
Eric, do you have any idea what we save CRS in diesel purchase at our pump?
Oh,
How much we save them?
Yeah,
we don't.
It's probably about 15 or 20% on the cost because we don't pay the federal excise tax on it.
Right.
I feel that number it's sizable.
yeah.
Is there any way to have this meeting with the county before we make this decision? I mean, it sounds crazy, but.
About cutting the
Yeah, it does
CRS?
sound
We,
crazy.
we would be lucky to have this
Yeah.
meeting with the county that gets
Ever.
in a result in this administration.
Okay.
I think
We have
Here's
to have
my
more
goal.
optimism for this.
I think
May
you
the
know?
7th.
We have to tell them
That's
we're
a
meeting
fair
with
vision
them.
of the glass.
May the 7th is our public hearing, May 14th is the introduction of the budget and the tax rate, and May 21st is the adoption. So whatever we can make happen between now and
And I
then.
won't be here May 21st.
Okay, for the final.
so,
Yeah. I'm out of town.
when do we have to have the other agency contributions and the programs, function events? When do we have to have that finalized?
If all we're doing is moving monies between those categories, we can do that at any point in time. But what we're gonna do separately for the Maryland Theater, because since we're doing and designating $100,000, either at the end of April or the end of May, there'll be a separate motion that says we commit $100,000 each year for the next 3 years, fiscal year 20, 21, 22, and then we'll have to determine the out years.
Yeah,
I
'cause
think
I
we
know we
ask
can
them to
move.
come back every year and ask.
We did ask them, so we should do just,
I know we can move money around, but I think these agencies like Discovery Station, like the film, they need to know for their planning purposes what's coming up, so they need to know what their fundraising objectives are, independent of anything the city's gonna give or anything the county's gonna give.
so The very next morning, the Wednesday after the budget is adopted at this group, we literally send out those memos to all those agencies to say, funding has been included in our adopted budget, here's the amount, and then we ask them to send the information. Now, with the Discovery Station, they already know that they're getting 2,500 because we committed to them to do that over 3 years. Same with the museum, we committed an extra 10,000 in 2021 for their HVAC. So there's an extra 10,000 in their line item, which is why they're at 50,000 when years before they were at 40. We did that in the past when we did
How long is that contribution? What's that?
for another year, fiscal year 21, 18, 19.
Michelle, you got anything else to cover?
Excellent, Michelle.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, lady.
You've done a fabulous job.
I agree.
City Administrator?
April 19th, community yard sale event at the stables at Fairground Park from 7 to 2, and an update for the parks. We have 21 parks that we own and operate for our citizens. Revised hours of operations this year, they are static at 6 to 10, and there are some events that will go a little bit later, but there'll be an exception to the rule. Tobacco products in totality are not allowed in our parks anymore, except for the golf course
And the stadium.
and some certain locations at the stadium.
Beer garden in particular.
That's correct.
That's it.
Yep, and fitness challenge at Parks and Recs, May 1 to May 30, prizes awarded, so everyone take part of that for us. Thank you.
Today was the beam topping of the Maryland Theater. There was a good bit of community participation, and it was well attended. Most of us here at this administration, we signed the beam. There was one that didn't, but I won't mention any names. But the one thing that was really neat in the presentation was they did a special thanks for the permit and code department. And, thanked them for working with them and showing up on site, twice a day and making it easy. And it was really gratifying, because I know that permit and codes, really get a kind of a, oh, and the fire marshal too. Yeah, definitely a shout out for the fire marshal too. So it's just so encouraging to hear positive news about permitting and codes whenever we kind of get beat up sometimes about them. So to have them in such a big part of, the construction, and it was great. It's great to see, and our city seal is up there. It looks great. I wish that they would not cover that part and just keep that section open, but I guess that's not gonna happen.
No.
Anyway, it was neat. It's great. It's a great day for downtown.
Lou?
All I can say is every day I look, what's happening in downtown Hagerstown is just wonderful. And when you talk about the film festival, I can't wait for these folks to come back here next year and see the change. So it's just a good time in Hagerstown and downtown.
Yeah, I echo the future's bright. I think everything's looking up, and just to echo what Shelley says, everyone I talk to who is in any way doing any kind of development work or any kind of projects downtown or anything else, I point blank, I make it a point to ask them, how's the interaction with the codes department? How's the interaction with individual inspectors by name? And how's the interaction with the fire marshal? Bar none, everybody is reporting positive things, which is 180 degrees out from the way it was several months ago. So kudos to the department, kudos to staff, and to everybody who's had that focus on it. And we can't backslide on that, though. We've got to keep going forward. So.
Question?
I know we did not spend as much time on it as probably, we have in prior years, but I want to thank city finance staff, and I know the other departments that contributed, but the finance staff for putting the budget together this year with all of the pieces and putting it together in a manner that limited the amount of hard work that we had to do at this table, so thank you.
And
just want to say thank you to Director Hayes from Washington County Emergency Services and the Board of County Commissioners. They donated an emergency services vehicle that previously was owned by the Air Unit 25 to the Hagerstown Police Department, free of charge. So on behalf of Chief Kiefer and HPD and us, thank them very much for that. Yeah.
Yes, I've had some conversations, and I had some while the film festival people were here, but I believe everybody is excited about next year when they come back and to be able to see a completed Maryland theater. And so it's, things are moving forward, just as I signed the beam onwards and upwards. So don't forget, opening day, Thursday night, Municipal Stadium, 6:05, first pitch. Let's go out there and support our hometown team. It's going to be a good time. I'll be out there. I'm warming up early so I can actually make it across the plate. So, yeah, may have to throw it underhanded, but anyway. So, and I want to thank Michelle and Mike for his leadership during this budget season, and look forward to. I know that Scott's working very closely with Michelle and Mike, and hopefully this transition goes nice and smooth. And then at the end of the month, we're going to have a new human resources director, so. Yeah.
While you're at it, I just asked you and Kristen, if you recall an easier budget year as far as.
I don't think we're done yet, but yeah, it's smooth so far. It has
Thank you,
been.
Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
All right, with that, we're adjourned. We'll see you next week.
Sounds great.